We are starting a new series, and I'll tell you what, I've not only not taught for like 4 or 5 weeks, but I slept real good last night. So have you ever woke up in the morning and you're like, man, I slept good? That's how I feel this morning. So I'm gonna be a little bit like an Energizer bunny today, and I need you all to like meet me at that level, all right? So no sticks in the mud today. I need you to engage and be a part, because I think this series is gonna be really, really good. And yes, it is slightly inspired by Barbie, but no, we're not gonna talk entirely about Barbie. We're gonna talk a lot about Abraham today. We're gonna talk a lot about Jesus today. And throughout this series, we're gonna really be zooming in on this question: how can we live authentically in a world full of plastic? How do we live authentically in a world full of plastic? And I don't know all of your beliefs and where you are in terms of God, the Bible, Jesus, me, or church, but I do know this, that every one of us in this room wants to live an authentic life. Like, you want to be able to show up in the world and be you. You want to be comfortable in your own skin. And it's not always easy to do that in this world, is it not? It's hard to show up authentically when pretty much every marketing campaign is telling you you're not really enough as you are. It's really, really difficult to show up authentically when you go on social media and every picture and every pose has the right filter and the right pose all going on at the same time, where you just feel like, am I ever measuring up? Chances are all of us in some way, shape, or form have felt this pressure to be some version other than actually who we are. And so this series is like, how can we show up in this world, but not only show up in this world, show up in your marriage authentically, show up in your relationships authentically, show up in your job authentically? How do you show up in your faith authentically? How do you be the real you in this world that is constantly trying to cram you in a box? How can we live authentically in a world full of plastic? Are you with me, Canvas family? Yeah. So we're gonna talk about this, and over the next few weeks, we're gonna be talking about next week how to experience authentic and real community, which is different than maybe what your community actually is, right? Maybe some of you have friends, but you don't have people that like really see you, that it's maybe an inch deep. We wanna talk about how do we find real, authentic, safe community. And then we're gonna talk about how do you experience real faith as opposed to religious faith. Like, some of us might say we have faith, but really what you have is a religion with God, but not a relationship with God. And Jesus didn't come to this earth, die on a cross, and rise again to organize an institutional religion. He came to invite you into a personal relationship with the creator of the universe. Is that how you would describe your walk with the Lord, though? And for some of us, if we're honest, and this is no shame or condemnation attached to it, some of us, we really have a religion, and that's about it. So how do we move beyond religion to a real relationship with Jesus? And then we're gonna talk about how to make a real impact in the world. In a world where, I don't know, it's easier and easier to just be sort of performative in your social justice work, right? You share the work that somebody else did as if you did it on your Instagram feed, and we think we're courageous because we shared a post, when really I think we're called to go further. We're actually called to make a real difference in the world, to show up as our real selves, but also make a real impact. How do we do that, though? Like, how do we, listening to Ali's story, show up and use this one single life we've been given for a story that's bigger than just ourselves? Because I think a story that's just all about you is not the story God's inviting you into. It's a story that encompasses all people and all things and bringing the kingdom of God to earth as it is in heaven. And so how do we do that? How do we make a real impact? We're gonna talk about that. And so I want to invite you over these next few weeks, especially if it's your first time here today, to make a commitment to be here. And if you're here all the time, be here the next few weeks and bring some friends, because I really do think this series is going to lean in and start some conversations that you've probably been wanting to have but didn't know where to have it. And by the way, we as a church are committed to being the sort of church that you can have the conversations that everyone else is scared to have. And we're willing to go there. We're willing to talk about hard things. We're willing to even disagree. We're willing to embrace nuance because we believe life is nuanced. And all of us have unique and important perspectives that we need to hear and experience from one another. And so if that is what you're looking for, welcome to Canvas. In fact, if you call Canvas your church home, can we show some love to our new friends here today that are joining? So today I want to talk about how do we show up as the real you? How do you begin to show up as the real you in the world? And this is when we pivot and start talking about Barbie a little bit. Who is excited about that? All right. Some of you are, some of you are not. Some of you just don't care. It's okay, but we're going to talk about Barbie for a moment. See, this movie has created quite a stir, has it not? Yeah. I mean, if your social feed is anything like mine, then you have varying opinions on the movie. Some people love it, feel that the movie gave them a voice. Other people do not like it. Other people do not like what the movie talks about. Other people are offended. Usually it feels like most of those people who are offended are insecure men, but we'll talk about that on another time. There's a lot of opinions. This has stirred up a lot of feelings for a lot of people. And I even read this article the other day that there have been like this mass amount of breakups happening after women have seen the movie Barbie. So they'll go to Barbie dating someone and they'll leave Barbie single because they finally realize, like, why am I with this guy? And they break up, which I think is kind of funny and sad for all the, very sad men out there. But I'll tell you what, I think any conversation that causes a person to leave something that's toxic is a conversation worth having. How about you? And so I think this movie gave voice to a lot of people, and whether you agree with the movie or not, I actually do think it's important as human beings that when we have these cultural moments where there seems to be a voice given to a group of people, whether you agree with it or not, it might be wise to listen. It might be wise to pay attention. Man, I need you to take a note so you don't become single after Barbie. Is maybe just ask how that movie spoke to you, to your partner as a woman, and then just listen. And not offer an opinion. And actually just allow yourself to practice empathy. See, I think it's just important, not only as followers of Jesus, but also as human beings, to practice empathy. Apathy, again, will not create a better world, but empathy sure does. And this movie has sparked something worth leaning into. And now there may be some people, why are we talking about Barbie and culture? Let's just talk about the Bible, Travis. Well, we will, for all my Bible nerds out there, we will talk about the Bible, but hear me on this. If you're offended with me talking about culture, you would really not like how Jesus taught. Because Jesus used culture all the time. He talked about farming. He talked about agriculture. He talked about that which was relevant for the world and day that people lived in. He used that as a way to extrapolate truth about God. So I actually don't think we're practicing anything out of alignment of Jesus by taking this cultural moment, leaning in and saying, I wonder what God has to say about some of it. And so that's what we're gonna do as we look at this series called Real. Now, let's talk about Barbie. Many have made Barbie all about patriarchy and gender stereotypes and toxic masculinity. And while those are certainly themes within the movie, I don't know anyone who's really been paying attention to the movie who would argue that it was the plot of the movie. It was themes within the movie, but not the plot. In fact, to boil down Barbie to one singular theme is to actually do an injustice to the layered and nuanced story that Greta Gerwig tells in the movie Barbie. While patriarchy and gender stereotypes and toxic masculinity are for sure themes, they serve more as the setting of Barbie than the plot of Barbie. And the setting is important to know, because the setting tells us how Barbie and Ken got to where they are. So we need to know the setting, but the plot tells us where they're going. All right, the setting tells us why Ken and Barbie have been shaped with the beliefs and convictions, healthy or not, that they have. But what the plot tells us is who they're becoming now as they step into the future. And it's the plot of Barbie that I actually thought was really interesting, really powerful. When you understand the plot of Barbie, you understand it's really not just a movie about Barbie. It's not just a movie about Ken. It's really a movie about being a person in today's world. Which reminds me of a truth that is important for all of us to remember, and that is, in your story, in the movie about you, you don't get to choose the setting of your story. That was chosen for you. But you do get to choose the plot of your story. The setting has never been up to you. You didn't get to choose who your parents were. You didn't get to choose who your siblings were. Who here would have chosen differently if you could have? Let's be, okay. If you're sitting next to your sibling, pretend that he's like, no, not you. I love you. You didn't get to choose. You didn't get to choose what city you were born into, what social class you're born into, what ethnicity you were born a part of, what era or generation you were born a part of. You didn't get to choose any of that. There was no survey sent up the birth canal to you saying, tell us what your preferred setting of life would be. All of that was chosen for you. And so while you have no control of the setting of your life, you always have control of the plot of your life. In other words, you may not have been able to control where your life starts, but you today and have always been in control of where your life is going. And even more, you are in control of who you are becoming. Now back to Barbie. If patriarchy, which by the way, I never thought I would say that in a sermon, right? But back to Barbie. If patriarchy and toxic masculinity and gender stereotypes are the setting but not the plot, then what is the plot of Barbie? Why should it matter to each and every one of us as we talk about being authentic in a world full of plastic? Here's how I would best define the plot of Barbie. The plot is about how if both Barbie and Ken were to become their authentic selves, they were going to need to journey beyond the boxes that are clean and yet confining that others have put them in order to experience the messy but free life of who they really are. Let me say it again. The plot of Barbie is about how Barbie and Ken, if they were to become their authentic selves, they were going to need to go on a journey and leave behind the clean and confining boxes that others have imposed on them in order for them to experience the messy but beautiful and freeing life that they were created to live, to become who they really are. And that journey for Barbie begins, if you're familiar with the movie. If not, you've probably seen the trailers and you know this as well. The journey for Barbie begins with thoughts of death during a dance party, which if I've ever thought about death, it has been during a dance party. So I can resonate. I really felt Barbie's pain in that. And which I'll be honest, this scene felt so human, because she tried to ignore this existential disruption. She tried to go back to the regularly scheduled program of being stereotypical Barbie, but she couldn't. Have you ever experienced something that after you experience it, you can't go back? You can't go back to life as you knew it before that? That's where she was. She couldn't even when she tried. In fact, some of you are struggling in life right now because you're trying to go to life in 2019 when 2020 changed everything. And you're wondering, why can't I move forward? It's because you're still trying to go backwards. Like Barbie, man, she woke up that next day after having this existential disruption and everything was different. The daily glass of milk that used to taste so sweet had expired and was sour. Her daily toast that she put in the toaster was now burned and tasteless. And her normal floating descent from the top of her house to the ground was no more as she crashed and plummeted, not only into the ground, but even more so into a new reality that was inviting her to come to explore and see where it takes her. And as I watch this story of Barbie unfold, like probably all of you in this room that saw the movie Barbie, I couldn't stop thinking about this 75-year-old Middle Eastern man who lived 4,000 years ago. I know, you were thinking the same thing during Barbie. And that's all I could think about as I watched this movie. And some of you are like, explain. All right. There was a man, and if you've been in church for a while, you sang a very annoying song about this man. His name is Father Abraham. And Abraham lived 4,000 years ago in the Middle East, in Mesopotamia, in a city called Ur. And Father Abraham will go on to become a man who not only would experience God in a life-transforming way, but he would change the entire course of human history. But you need to understand the setting that Abraham was living in. We could go into great detail, but the sort of high-level big thing that we need to understand that's important for Abraham's story is that Abraham lived in a world unlike ours because this world was a polytheistic world, meaning it was a world where worshiping many gods and going to many different idols and temples, worshiping all these sorts of gods. Maybe it's not as different from our world today, but they lived in a world that was polytheistic, not monotheistic. Monotheism had not arrived on the cultural landscape yet until now, because Abraham would go on to become really the first iconoclast of the human story. A person who would introduce humanity into a new way of being human as he would pivot us from a polytheistic world into one that is monotheistic. And Abraham, or Father Abraham, as many of you sang about him, he would become the spiritual father of 2.4 billion Christians, 1.6 billion Muslims, and 13 million Jews. He would become someone that not only would we sing about, but we would remember 4,000 years later. And what's so interesting about this man named Abraham did not rule one empire. He never led a great army. He never was victorious in a battle. And he never performed one miracle. And so you might ask, what did he do to warrant 4,000 years of memory? See, what he did is something that all of us can do. And it will not only change your world, it will change the world if we do it just like Abraham did. And that is, Abraham heard the voice of God beckoning him into a new future. And he had the courage and the audacity to say yes. To leave behind everything he had known, everyone he had known, everything he had been told, everything that had shaped his worldview. He was willing to leave behind, to step into this new journey that the voice of God was inviting him into. And since then, the world has never been the same. And we read this story in Genesis chapter 12. If you have your Bible, you can open up there. Genesis 12 is this turning point in the scriptural narrative because it is that moment where Abraham gets this invitation from God to embark on an entirely new journey that the world has ever known. So by the way, if you've ever gone soul searching in your life, if you've ever tried to go and find yourself, then you have Abraham to thank for that because he did it first. He introduced the very concept to the human story. And none of the world has ever been the same ever since. And it all happened in Genesis 12. In this moment where Abraham, like Barbie, wasn't looking for change, but change came looking for her and for him. Abraham's life was disrupted. But he would find that this disruption was actually divine, which, by the way, can I tell you, if you're here and you have experienced disruptions in your life, maybe it's divine. Maybe God is disrupting you to invite you into something better. Maybe it's the only way God could get your attention, to invite you into who you were always meant to be. Yeah, I think it's worth being curious when you experience a disruption to lean back and go, well, God, what are you up to in my life? Because that's what happens with Abraham. Here in Genesis 12, it says this: the Lord said to Abram, and that was his name. God eventually changed his name from Abram to Abraham, but same person. The Lord said to Abram, go. Everyone say go. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and I will curse you. And whoever curses you, I will curse, and all the peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Now, what's interesting about this moment in Genesis 12 is also something that you and I and most people miss when we read this story, and it's not your fault. Because chances are that none of you, maybe if you are, let me know after service, but I'm just going to wager none of you are fluent in biblical Hebrew. And yet if you aren't fluent in biblical Hebrew and you only read the English translation of this, it is easy to miss the significance of what is happening in Abram's life right here. But over the last, 4 or 5 years, I've actually spent that amount of time studying these 3 verses. It's a long time to study 3 verses. And I promise this isn't a shameful plug. I wrote a book called Life is Calling, and it's all about this moment. It's all about when God calls Abraham and why that was so significant, not only for Abraham, but also for you and I today. And what's significant is found in that word, go. Now, when you hear that word go, you might believe that that word is inviting Abraham onto a geographical journey, which is, without a doubt, a part of the story, but just not the maybe plot of the story. Yes, God invites Abraham to go from this place to what will be known as the Promised Land. But what's interesting about this word in Genesis 12 is that there is a wide array of words the Genesis author could have used that would have been geographical words, meaning there would have been Hebrew words available to the author to tell us that God was solely inviting Abraham to go from this geographical location to now this geographical location. And yet the author of Genesis doesn't use any of those geographical words available to him or her, whoever the author is. Instead, the word that we're given is this really mysterious and beautiful word that people have been unpacking for the last 4,000 years. And it's this Hebrew word, lech lecha. Want to try that with me? Let's try it. It sounds like you're hawking something up. All right, lech lecha. Lech lecha. And what does lech lecha mean? It doesn't mean go from this place to that place, but it actually means literally journey lech to yourself, lecha. Journey to yourself. So when God disrupts Abraham in this moment and he says, go, lech lecha, it's this invitation from God to Abraham to journey to yourself. And in the Jewish Midrash, which is sort of a commentary on the Hebrew text, this is how it is explained. Lech lecha means go forth to find your authentic self, to learn who you're meant to be. Now the story just got way more interesting, doesn't it? Because in this moment that changed the course of the human narrative, God meets Abraham right where he is in the setting of this polytheistic world, and he says, lech lecha, I'm inviting you into a journey to yourself. I'm inviting you to go forth and find your authentic self, to be who you are meant to be. It was Abraham's Barbie moment. Or maybe it was Barbie's Abraham moment. I don't know which one's more accurate, but Abraham was being invited to leave behind who he always knew himself to be in the context of the world that had shaped him in order to discover who he was always meant to be, to discover who he really was. It wasn't just an invitation into a new place, but Genesis 12 is an invitation for Abraham into a new personhood. And just as Barbie had to leave Barbie land to go from plastic to person, Abram would have to leave the land he had always known to become who he was always meant to be. Have you ever wondered why stories like this last for 4,000 years? Yeah, because I don't know about you, you're probably not going to remember this sermon after 4 years or 4 days. So why does Abraham's story last for 4,000 years? And why does movies like the Barbie movie, why does it create such a cultural moment that people are talking about it all of the time? I think maybe it's because deep in our bones, we know that this is not just their story. It's our story. It's my story. It's all of our stories and the journeys that all of us must go on if we are going to experience what it means to be wholly and truly and authentically human. See, we're all faced with the same question that Barbie and Abraham faced. And that question is, are you going to live your one life you've been given inside the clean and confining box of what others say you are? Or will you follow that still small voice that beckons you to leave behind what you've known in order to become who you were always meant to be? Let me give you a too long didn't read version of that. Will you live your life intentionally, or will you live your life for the intentions of others? Will you live this one single life God has given you intentionally, or will you live your life for the intentions of others? Because that is not only the question of Barbie, it's the question of Abraham. It's the question of life, is it not? How will you live this life, this gift that God has given you? And maybe for some of you, your feet, like Barbie, have been brought to the ground. You know, in that moment, all of a sudden, when she knew everything was different, the pink high heels that conformed so perfectly to her stereotypical Barbie feet no longer fit anymore. And her feet came crashing to the ground. And I wonder if there's maybe some of you here in this place today that your feet have come crashing to the ground lately. I mean, maybe in 2019, your life was predictable. It was amazing. It was up and to the right. Your business was thriving. Your marriage was thriving. Your relationships were thriving. Your health was thriving. And then 2020 happened. And ever since then, even in 2023, your feet are still having trouble finding traction to move into the future. Maybe for some of you, your feet came crashing to the ground lately because you were laid off from your company. And when you felt so secure in your company, all of a sudden your feet came crashing down when you were let go. When you felt as if you were just a number, a cog in the machine of the company that you've been working for. Maybe for others of you, your faith, the feet of your faith has come crashing to the ground. You know, maybe at some point in time when you were a child, your parents told you that if you pray and you believe it hard enough, then God will do it. And so you prayed and you believed hard enough, or at least you tried everything you had, and yet the very thing you prayed for didn't happen, and your feet came crashing to the ground, and you're like, how do I even walk in faith anymore? Maybe for some of you, it was an affair that got your feet to the ground. Maybe for others of you, it was a relationship that ended that causes your feet to crash to the ground. Maybe for others of you, an addiction or mental or emotional health or battle you've been facing, and it feels like what used to be here is now here. Can anyone relate to what I'm talking about? Like, I think that all of us at some point in time have experienced that feeling where your feet come crashing to the ground. And if that is you, then I wonder if God is saying to you this morning, and perhaps even beyond this morning, he's been saying to you, Lech Lecha. I'm inviting you into something new. I'm inviting you into something beautiful. I'm inviting you to discover who you really are. I'm not inviting you to conform any longer to the box that others have imposed on you, but I'm inviting you into the expansive world of who you are. There's this funny scene in Barbie. And in this funny scene, Barbie, she's wrestling with this existential crisis that now she's experiencing. And she goes to Weird Barbie, which is by far my most favorite character in the entire movie. Weird Barbie is pretty funny. And she goes to Weird Barbie, and I won't spoil everything, but if you haven't seen it by now, it's your own fault. So she goes to Weird Barbie, and you might know what happens. Weird Barbie presents her with like a Matrix-esque proposition, right? She goes to stereotypical Barbie, and she says, you have the pink high heel. You can go back to your life as you knew it, as stereotypical Barbie, or you have the Birkenstock, a shoe that is more suited for her newly flat feet. And I love what Barbie does, because she does what all of us does. She's like, I'll take the heel. I'll take the high heel. I'll go back to certainty, predictability, and comfortability over the uncertainty, unpredictability, and uncomfortability of the Birkenstock. And who here wouldn't have done the same? But I love about Weird Barbie, she's like, yeah, there's really only one choice. I just presented it, but you only got one. You got to do this. You got to go and see where the journey takes you. And I love that in the Barbie movie that the image here is that of shoes. Because in Barbie, the old shoes wouldn't work on the new road. And that'll preach, won't it? Like the new road won't fit the old shoes. You need new shoes if you're going to walk the new road and discover the new thing or true thing that God is calling you to. And I wonder if some of us, the reason you're tripping up in the new thing that God wants to do is because you're like running into the future in heels. You're running into your future on old shoes that might have supported you in who you were, but you've changed. Life has changed. You need some new shoes today if you're going to walk the new road that God is calling you on. Now, I don't have the authority to tell you who you are and tell you exactly what God is up to, so I won't pretend that I can do that. I can't. But if you'll allow me, I would love to spend the rest of our time together being your own personal Weird Barbie. Okay? And what I want to do is pretend that going back to the way things were isn't ever really an option. I mean, to be totally honest, going back to the way things were isn't an option, ever. It's an illusion. You literally cannot go back to the way things were because life only moves one direction. It only moves forward. So the question is, how are you going to walk this new road, and do you need some new shoes? So as your personal Weird Barbie this morning, I would love to present 4 questions, or 4 different pairs of shoes, if you will, to walk this new road for those whose feet have maybe come crashing down to the ground as of late. If you're wanting to experience the new, true, real, authentic you, show up in this life as who you are, I think these are 4 really important questions. The first is this: you need to evaluate your relationships. What relationships need to be rethought, reevaluated as you step into the new road as the new you? Proverbs 18, verse 24 says, one who has unreliable friends soon comes to ruin, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. In other words, it is better to have a few best friends than a multitude of unreliable ones. It is way better to have one best friend than 100 people who will never show up for you when it matters most. So let me ask you, and this is kind of a hard question, especially if you're a little more non-confrontational in your personality type. But let me ask you this question when it comes to your relationships. What relationships in your life do you need more of, less of, or none of? What relationships do you need more of, less of, and none of? Like, let's look at the first one. Who are the people that pull the best out of you? Don't you love them? The ones that know how to challenge you in a way that doesn't crush you, that doesn't shame you, but actually is speaking to your identity and dignity. Ooh, those are some good friends. And friends that also encourage you as much as they challenge you. But also friends that when you are in the deepest, darkest night of the soul, they show up and sometimes they don't say anything. They're just there because they're committed to you, regardless of how good or bad the version of you in that moment is. Who are those people? Chances are it's not 100. Chances are it's maybe not even 10. It's probably like 1 to 3 people, maybe. I would say if you have 3 of these kind of friends, you're doing real good. I mean, no one ever talks about the miracle of Jesus, that he had 12 best friends in his 30s. Woo, that's a miracle right there. So who are some people that you need more of? Who are some people, and this is where it gets a little tougher, that you need less of? Not that you cut them off, ghost them, cancel them, throw them to the curb. If anything, these are the people that maybe for a season of your life, they were really, really helpful. It was mutually supportive, but it's no longer that way. And we now need to actually create just a little bit of distance. And I know that sounds mean. I know that sounds harsh. It's not good or bad. It just is. There are certain people that walk with you well in certain seasons that are not equipped to walk with you in the next. And so I wonder if maybe there's some people in your life that you need a little bit less of. I mean, have you ever had one of those moments where you go to lunch with somebody you have a lot of relational history with? Maybe you're like really good friends and you go to lunch with them. And then after the lunch, you have this moment of epiphany. You go, we're different now. Have you had that? Ooh, things have changed. They're a good person. It's not an indictment on their character or anything. It's just, we've changed. And now we just need to call it what it is. We're friends, but maybe I need a little less of this relationship because it's no longer mutually supportive. But then here's the last one. Who do you need none of? You know, who do you need more of? Who do you need less of? Who do you need none of? Let me put it in a way that most millennials and Gen Zers in the room will understand. Who do you need to start unfollowing on Instagram or TikTok? Seriously, because there's some of you still have people in your orbit and your social media feed that do nothing good for your soul. In fact, you see their lives moving forward and it actually just keeps you stuck where you are. And maybe there's a past wound or bitterness, and for whatever reason, you've continued to keep that relationship. I wonder if maybe some of you, like right now, you need to go on your Instagram. You need to just unfollow. And maybe for others of us, it's not so much on Instagram or social media, but maybe it's a family member. Maybe it is a friendship that you've had for a long time that is toxic. Maybe it's a relationship. You're dating someone right now and you're like, no, this is unhealthy. This is toxic. And I actually don't need any of this. And I'll tell you this, this is hard, is it not? I don't believe any of you in this room are like, yeah, just like cut everybody off. Like, this is really hard stuff. And you will offend some people. You'll offend some people when they find out you don't follow them, which is such a millennial like dilemma. You don't follow me anymore on the gram. But there's people who will get mad about that. There's gonna be people that you had a hard conversation with, that you told them, hey, look, this relationship has gone as far as it's going to go. It cannot, will, and I will not allow it to go any further because you're in charge of your plot. And that's going to be a hard conversation, and not everyone will understand why you're doing it. Can I tell you something I learned during the pandemic? And this is sort of a hot take, but also sort of a dark take, so go with me. I learned in the pandemic, I was obsessing about the opinions of people that if I died today, they would move on tomorrow. I was obsessing about the opinions of people who probably wouldn't even show up to my funeral if I died today. Why would I do that to myself? And chances are I'm probably not the only one, that some of you are obsessing about what people think of you and they would move on tomorrow if you died today. I wonder what it would look like just to move on yourself now, to be able to create a social network that is actually mutually supportive for who God has called you to be. I love how Nina Simone put it. How do you know when it's time to move on? She said this: you have to learn when to get up from the table when love is no longer being served. Come on. You got to know when to get up from the table when love is no longer being served. Life is far too short. The road is far too important for you to walk it with shoes that no longer fit. And by the way, we will talk about next week. Authentic community goes two ways. So it's not only making sure that you have safe, authentic friendships, but that you also create a habitat where authentic and safe friendships can form as well. We'll talk about that more next week. But here's the second pair of shoes, and that's your environment. First, relationships. What relationships need to change? Second, environment. What environments are unhelpful? If you're gonna walk the journey God has you on and become the real you, it's worth asking yourself, what environments are no longer helpful or maybe have never been helpful that you now need to remove yourself from on a real, like maybe granular level? If you live in a home full of roommates that are going nowhere and they're trying to keep you there with them, maybe it's time to find some new roommates. Maybe it's time to start getting in the orbit of others that are actually going in the trajectory that aligns with who you're created to be. If you work at a job that has a toxic culture that is harmful to your emotional or mental health, I know it provides your paycheck, but how much is your soul worth? A lot more. How much is your health worth? A lot more. Maybe it's time to turn in the 2 weeks and to remove yourself from that environment. And with the holidays coming up, this one's particularly relevant. If family get-togethers end with you feeling shameful, with you feeling manipulated, gaslit, or at an emotional deficit, then maybe this Thanksgiving it's time to learn to make your own turkey. Maybe this Thanksgiving it's time to get a circle of people that can walk this road with you and you enjoy that together. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 23 says this. Paul, he writes, I have the right to do anything you say, but not everything is beneficial. I have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. I mean, I love what Paul's saying here, and it applies so perfectly to this topic of conversation. The battle you'll face is likely not between an evil environment and a good one, but a permissible one and a beneficial one. Sure, you can go there, and it's not like sin or evil, and maybe you can make it through the other side and be okay, but is it beneficial? Is it constructive? Now that is the battle, and I wonder how different our lives would be if we actually started looking at the environments we placed our lives in and stopped asking, is it good or bad, and just started asking, is it good or beneficial? Is it permissible or is it constructive? I wonder what environments you would need to leave like today, because Barbie had to leave Barbie land. Abraham had to leave Mesopotamia. And chances are, if you're gonna step into this new road that God is leading you on, you're gonna have to leave somewhere as well. Here's the third thing is attitudes. What limiting mindsets are you living with? What limiting mindsets are you living with that you actually need to leave behind? In fact, if you go to another Hebrew word in Genesis 12, it's this word moldeth, and it translates in English as family. But when you actually peel back the layers of that word, it's talking about all the social structures that have shaped you, the mindsets, the attitudes. So God is like, you're gonna have to leave everything you thought how it worked, how you thought life was. If you're gonna become who you were meant to be, you're gonna have to leave that behind. So I wonder what attitudes that are limiting you are things that you need to leave behind. I love what Gandhi said. He said this, he said, your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions become your habits become your values become your destiny. So what is the origin of destiny? I would argue it's belief. That who you believe you are is most likely who you will become at the end of your life. You build what you believe. Your beliefs are the material, the brick and mortar that you're building your life with. So if you want to change what you're building, you got to probably start by changing what you're believing, changing those mindsets that you have. And by the way, before Gandhi said it, Paul said it. In Romans chapter 12, Paul in Romans 12, he says this. He says, don't copy the behavior and customs of this world. And then he answers the question, how does God transform somebody's life? God transforms you into a new person by changing the way you what? Think. Isn't that interesting? Because sometimes in religious contexts like this, we are convinced that the way God changes us is through our behavior. But that's more fruit than root. You want to change the fruit of your behavior, you got to transform the root of your beliefs. Trying to change your behavior without changing your beliefs is like a cocktail of failure, which is exactly why most New Year's resolutions fail, right? Because you're trying to behave your way into a new being instead of actually going after the root, which is your beliefs in the first place. So how does God change a person? Through changing your beliefs. There's this adage that says the sky is the limit, but it's not true, is it? The sky isn't the limit. The mind is the limit. Your beliefs are the limit. Your life starts where your mind sets. And so if you want to change where your mind sets and where your life starts, you need to get a new mindset. And maybe for some of us, it's a new mindset or two or three to step into the new. And some of you may be able to right now identify broken mindsets. In fact, I would say, what do you think about yourself when you are at your lowest? That's probably a mindset that you need to lean into. And for some of you, you're like, how do I change it? Let me just give you a real practical, just reverse it. So maybe for some of you, you're living with a mindset that says, I am a broken person. Flip it. I'm a healing person. I am a failure. No. You're just getting stronger. You're just getting strong. You're growing. That's who you are, a growing person. I am unworthy. No, turn it, flip it. I am worthy of love and dignity. So how do we step into this new you? You got to evaluate your relationships, your environments, your attitudes, and lastly is this, your loves. Your loves. What loves need more of your attention? What loves need more of your attention? Barbie lived in a world where it was assumed on her behalf that she would fall in love with Ken, but she did not love Ken. And I'll be honest, I love that at the end of the movie, she never loves Ken in that way. It would have ruined everything. Yeah. See, she had to discover who she was apart from the box that others had placed on her. She had to pursue those true, raw, real passions of hers. Yeah, and there's some of us that maybe you've sacrificed some things you love to love what other people love, to fit in the box. I think about Jenna and, being a mom. Being a mom, I'm not a mom, but I can see from Jenna's experience, being a mom is hard. Moms in the room, can I get an amen? Okay. Like being a mom is difficult. I had to see Jenna navigate that and all the complexities because moms, you probably understand this in the room, there are a lot of stereotypes placed on moms. This is how you're supposed to behave. You're supposed to love all these things. If you really love your kid, if you really love being a mom, then here's like sort of the cookie cut thing that you should fit into. So you should love cooking and cleaning. And when your kid is screaming, just be grateful, and you know what? Like I've seen it again and again. Parents who lose their loves because they get lost even in parenting, that they lose themselves. And can I tell you today, hopefully it provides a little freedom, like you can love your child and still also pursue what you love as well. And it's important that you do. One of the greatest gifts you can give your kid is just being an authentic parent and showing them what it looks like to embark on that journey. It's an incredible gift you'll give your kid. Yeah. So what passions or loves do you need to pursue? Maybe you're caught up in the hustle culture of San Francisco. Parenting is not relevant for you, but hustle is. Maybe you're trying to navigate the hustle culture of San Francisco that permeates our city, and there's this expectation imposed on you. If you don't love the endless grind, then you're not really that successful. You don't really bring that much worth. You're really not that good of a leader because real leaders like the grind. They're the first one in, last one out. I'll sleep when I die. If that's not you, then you don't fit the box. And maybe some of you tried so hard to fit that box at the expense of your own passions, at the expense of your own loves, maybe even the expense of relationships you really need. Let me just ask it this way. Where in your life have you traded what you love for obligation? What have you traded in your life, a passion for obligation? Solomon, he writes this, he says, I know that there's nothing better for people than to be happy and do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in all their toil. That is a gift from God. Have you ever known that satisfaction in this life is a gift from God he wants you to experience? Experiencing good things that make you happy day in and day out is a gift from God. So that means like treating yourself is a spiritual discipline. It is important in your life to pursue what you love, instead of living your life loving what others say you need to love. Yeah. So that's what I want to invite you into this morning is What relationships need to be reevaluated? What environments need to be rethought? What attitudes need to be removed? And what loves do you need to return to as you step in this new road that God is inviting you into? If the band wants to come up, we're going to wrap up. And I think if there's maybe one love that I would encourage all of you to explore, to pursue, to lean into, it's the love of God. It's the love of God. And some are like, you have to say that because you're a pastor. No, I really believe it with everything that is in me, that when you understand the love of God, you will also experience a deeper, realer love of yourself. You know, God has always loved you, but God doesn't love the version of you that you think you need to be. And he doesn't love the maybe future version that you say you're trying to be on others' behalf. God has always just loved you as you are and wants to know you as you are, be known by you as you are. And what's so interesting is when you experience the love of God, you experience a deeper love of self. Because as you love God, you begin to love what God loves. And you know who God loves? You, just as you are. So if there's a version of God you've been following that actually creates shame in you, fear of you, a disgust with you, I'm so sorry, that is not the God Jesus came to introduce you to. Because the God that Jesus embodies and represents and invites us all to is a God who invites us not only to love him, but to love others and also love yourself. Can we pray?